چی میخوای؟
چند؟
تو چی فکر کردی من فاحشه نیستم؟
Today, I'm going to talk about a really good movie called The Patient Stone. It takes place in Afghanistan, a country torn apart by war. In this movie, there's a 30-year-old woman who takes care of her paralyzed husband. He became paralyzed because of a bullet in his neck. Despite all the shooting and explosions happening outside, the woman never leaves her husband alone. She takes care of him by washing his hands and face. She holds a rosary in her hands and prays to Allah, asking for strength for her husband to fight his illness. The woman tries different things to bring her husband out of his coma. She asks him to hold his breath, hoping he'll respond. But sadly, he doesn't react to her words, which makes her feel sad. The doctor had said that her husband would recover and be able to speak again in 1 or 2 weeks. But it's been 16 days now, and there's been no improvement. Her husband remains motionless. Only her 2 daughters are able to distract the woman from her sick husband. They are very hungry and ask their mother to get food because they have run out of bananas and drinking water is running low. Leaving the house with her daughters, the woman asks their neighbor if the water seller has arrived and then goes to the pharmacy. As soon as the family leaves their home, some armed militants drive by and start shooting at the enemy. The local residents are used to living in a dangerous and chaotic place where explosions and gunshots are common. Despite this, they don't get frightened. A woman goes to a pharmacy and asks the pharmacists to give her the medicine she needs to keep her husband alive. However, the seller refuses to help because she has no money and owes him. The woman doesn't have the opportunity to earn money, so she returns home. Instead of medicine, she gives her husband a dropper filled with salty sweet water, which helps alleviate his hunger. Even though her husband is unable to speak, the woman constantly turns to him and asks for permission to go to the store or visit her aunt. However, knowing he won't respond, she puts on a brave face and goes to see her aunt. Her aunt is the only relative who didn't leave the city due to the ongoing shelling and military clashes. She knocks on the door, but an unknown woman answers and says she doesn't know where the aunt is. The unknown woman can't help her in any way, so she dismisses the woman. This is a devastating blow for the woman because she realizes she has no one else to turn to. She returns home and tells her husband about the encounter. His brothers and mother had already left the city out of fear of the shelling, without considering the need to inform the woman and her daughters. This deeply hurts the woman because she knows the reason her husband was shot in the neck and became paralyzed. Exactly 16 days ago, her husband had an altercation with a man who insulted his mother. Interestingly, the woman's husband had been fighting against the enemy for years, but ended up getting shot by a fellow comrade, someone from his own side, who resorted to unfair means. He was shot in the back. Realizing that she only has Allah by her side, the woman continues to pray and asks the Almighty for help in healing her sick husband. The girls, who are scared of the dark, manage to distract her from talking to her husband. The house has no electricity or water, so the mother takes care of her daughters and lights a kerosene lamp. The little ones don't understand what's happening with their father and think he's angry because of them. The mother comforts the girls and assures them that everything will be fine. Returning to her husband's bedroom, the woman continues to take care of him by changing the water in the dropper and washing his body. The next morning, a doctor visits to examine the injured man. The woman doesn't let him into the house, explaining that she is unclean and currently menstruating. Realizing he can't see the wounded man, the doctor asks for prayers and promises to return in a few days. While examining the man's body, the woman checks his wound and realizes it's not healing. There's still a bullet lodged in her husband's neck, which is terrible because she doesn't know how to help him recover and return to his normal life. A few minutes later, the woman hears an announcement throughout the city to gather at the mosque and acquire weapons to defend their city. She understands that there will be attacks, and shortly after, the first explosion is heard. Frightened, the woman rushes into the basement, taking her 2 daughters with her. The neighbors also seek shelter in the basement, but leave behind a man in a wheelchair because they can't bring him inside. While in the shelter, the locals listen to the radio for news and remain inside until the missile attack is over. Once the explosions subside, the woman quickly checks if her husband is alive by going to his bedroom. Meanwhile, the neighbors manage to bring the disabled man into the basement, realizing that more explosions are imminent. The woman puts drops in her husband's eyes and notices tanks and armed enemies approaching outside the window. The attackers show no mercy and fire indiscriminately, causing widespread damage in the city. After a few gunshots, the woman realizes she needs to return to the basement and rushes back to her frightened daughters. A few hours later, she comes back to the house and cleans up the mess caused by the shelling. She fixes the window that was blown out by the shockwave. She realizes that this is not the end and goes back to the girls in the basement. Meanwhile, fighters enter the house and see a man lying still. They steal his watch and wedding ring before searching the other rooms. They don't find anyone else in the house, and the man doesn't move. They think he is dead. When they notice the man's uniform next to him, the militants realize he is one of them and don't touch him. They calmly leave the house. A little later, the woman returns home and sees that there has been a search and some things were stolen. But she realizes that this is not the worst thing. The men from the neighboring house were found murdered and hanging in the yard. She understands that this cannot continue and decides to gather her things and take her daughters to her aunt's place. An unknown person opens the door for her, and the mother of the two girls drives them away. But she refuses to leave. With no other choice, a stranger gives her the new address of her aunt, who is moved to a hotel where it is easier for girls and women to access. The mother, along with her two children, finds her aunt, who lives in another part of the city, and asks her to look after her daughters. The aunt shares her own story, revealing that she was once married. When her husband discovered she was unable to have children, he sent her to serve his parents. The father-in-law, upon learning about her infertility, forced her into a relationship. This continued until she killed him and escaped, finally gaining her freedom. Leaving her children with the aunt and taking some money, the woman returns home to her husband. She couldn't leave him to die alone. However, she now understands why his relatives left him. Like his brothers, they knew about the impending war and realized that the house was in the line of fire. The woman blames her husband for not telling her about the danger and not warning her and the children. She also decides to confess that she is unhappy in the marriage. Throughout their 10 years together, she rarely saw her husband, but she was admired by his brothers. If he had died, she could have become the wife of one of them and would have been safe. But that didn't happen. She is even more hurt by the fact that her husband never paid attention to her as a person. She married the photograph, and the control of her husband's mother was so strong that she even slept with it to prevent infidelity while he was away at war. The man doesn't understand why she is sharing all this with him, but she is certain that he hears her and continues to delve into her memories. Her father had a strange obsession with quails. He would spend hours stroking them and then arrange fights between them, even placing bets on the outcome. He was a terrible head of the family because he would often raise his hand not only to his wife but also to his daughters. One day, her father gambled away all his money on expensive and special quails, hoping to become rich. However, during one of the fights, a bird got scared and ran away. Unable to pay his debts, her father made a desperate decision. He gave his 12-year-old daughter in marriage to a man to whom he owed money. Fearful of becoming the next victim, the woman, still a child at that time, took a quail and fed it to the cat. Unfortunately, the cat left scars on her face. Feeling oppressed and trapped, the woman decided not to share any more of her troubles with her husband. She ran away to her aunt and confided in her, revealing terrible secrets. Her relative told her that a paralyzed person unknowingly becomes a magical stone of patience, to whom one can pour out everything. There was a legend that the stone could endure anything, but one day it would shatter into thousands of small pieces, turning its owner into a prophet of Allah. Realizing that her husband had not responded for 3 weeks, the woman believed he had become her patience stone, to whom she could reveal all her thoughts. When she returned home, she washed her husband and kissed him for the first time in their 10 years of marriage. In that moment, she remembered their wedding night and the painful truth that she couldn't conceive a child. Her mother-in-law treated her poorly, forcing her to commit a forbidden act that she still couldn't bring herself to talk about. Soon, the woman started hearing strange sounds, which turned out to be the neighbors burying their relatives. With no money for her husband's treatment, she refused to let the doctor inside and decided to leave. However, she returned shortly afterward, as the city had become filled with soldiers who could harm her paralyzed husband. She hid him in a niche, covering him with curtains and a pillow for protection. A few minutes later, the commander of the detachment and a soldier who stutters entered the house. The woman was scared that they would take her forcefully. She confessed that she was selling her body. A Muslim, considering this behavior disgraceful and disgusting, refused to touch her and instead insulted and spat on her face. Little did he know, the woman had a hidden knife and was prepared to kill the commander if he approached her. That night, the woman went to bed next to her husband, promising to share all the secrets in the morning. She overheard someone coming and quickly hid her husband behind a screen. It turned out to be the stuttering soldier who had returned. He was young and inexperienced with women, willing to pay any amount for some pleasurable time. The woman tried to stop him, but the soldier threw money on the floor and forced himself on her. After a moment of embarrassment, the woman cried and tried to cleanse herself of the shame in the bathroom. The next morning, she decided to use the money she earned to buy water, food, and medicine for her husband. When she returned home, she set up a drip for her husband and went outside to do laundry. The young soldier visited again, offering generous payment for a brief encounter with a beautiful woman. After that intimate moment, the woman confessed to her husband, realizing that in the past, he would have killed her for such a revelation. This made her reproach her husband, criticizing his poor performance in bed. The soldier was learning and therefore better at everything, even though their meetings only lasted a minute. At some point, the woman realized the inappropriateness of her words and sought to repent for her sins. The next morning, she noticed that someone had repaired the fence. It turned out to be the young soldier who dreamed of spending just one more minute in her arms. He was mistreated by the commander, resulting in cigarette burns on his body. Seeing all this, the woman calmed down and sincerely sympathized with the orphan soldier who unwillingly became a soldier. A woman hears an announcement in town that tells the story of how people become prophets. She talks about it with her aunt and understands that no one is born a prophet and they also have flaws. When she returns home, she finds fruit and a gold chain given to her by a soldier she loves. It makes her feel like a real woman and brings her happiness. Now she tries to be affectionate towards her husband, but realizes that she is behaving in a bad way and feels guilty for her sins. She realizes that she can no longer hide the truth. The woman decides to reveal her main secret. When she was pregnant, she tried multiple times to get rid of the child. At birth, she even attempted to harm her daughter, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. The reason behind her actions was her husband's infertility, which she kept a secret because she was afraid of losing her marriage and becoming a nobody. She sought help from her once acquaintance, pretending he was a healer who her mother-in-law paid money to. In reality, the woman had relations with other men in an attempt to get pregnant. Both girls are not her husband's children, and she doesn't know who their fathers are. Upon hearing this terrible truth, her husband wakes up from a coma and tries to strangle his wife. In self-defense, she kills him with a knife and believes that she has become a prophetess. A young soldier who visits the woman at the wrong time becomes a witness to this event.